Hello, I hope you're well. Welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a fun one, or at least I hope so. It is popular historical fiction books I haven't read yet. And this video is completely inspired by Regan over at PeruseProject, who did basically this video for fantasy books that she hasn't read yet, and it's such a fun time. I'm linking it in the description box for you, so certainly check it out. I was just really inspired by it and wanted to take a stab at it with historical fiction books. I think it's pretty safe to say that I am a historical fiction booktuber. Yes, I read other books. I read nonfiction, classics, translations, basically whatever tickles my fancy, but historical fiction is my favorite genre. I read a ton of it, and it's my go-to. But there are still really popular historical fiction novels that I haven't read yet, and it's kind of embarrassing. So I'm going to take you on this journey, share, I think it's 10 books total, that as a historical fiction booktuber I probably should read or get around to reading at some point. But yeah, why don't we dive right in? Okay, so the first book is the one that I'm probably the most ashamed to say that I have not read yet, and it is Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. I know, it's like a crime to say I am a booktuber who focuses on historical fiction and I have not read this book. It has won all of these awards, it was turned into a TV show, it basically makes every list of like the best historical fiction of all time. Historical fiction booktubers, this is one of their favorite books of all time without fail, and somehow, some way, I have never read it. It's not that I don't want to, because I actually own a copy of Wolf Hall from I think the year that it was published, and I actually own the second book in the trilogy as well, Bringing Up the Bodies, but I've just never read either of them. And I don't know why, because Tudor history was what got me into historical fiction in the first place, and what got me into history in the first place. And this is the fictionalized biography of Thomas Cromwell during the reign of Henry VIII, which should, like, put it at the top of the list for me because of all of those things. I don't know if it's because Wolf Hall is a fairly large book, but then again, I don't have an issue with long books, as anyone who watches this channel will know, so I don't think that's it. The only reason that I could come up with for why I haven't read this book yet is because I think Wolf Hall came out when I was at college, which means I wasn't really doing a lot of like leisure or recreational reading, because as an English and history major I had a lot of required reading that I had to do. And then by the time I was out of school, I think the second book in the series was already out, so I felt like I had to play catch up. That's just like me trying to come up with a logical excuse for my shame. But at some point I do plan to read this book, because as I said, it has won all the awards and the admiration of so many people whose opinions on books I respect. So at some point I'll need to read this. Don't know when, but at some point it's gonna happen. The next book is The Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett, and never say never, but this is one of the historical fiction novels that I'm least drawn to, and I don't really have any plans to read in the future. From what I know, it is medieval historical fiction, which intrigues me because I don't read a lot set during that time period, and it's essentially about the construction of this cathedral in a fictional town, and I think kind of the evolution or transformation of this like backwater type village into this major town with trade and wealth and kind of this cultural epicenter because cathedral. I don't really know much more about it. It's a very long book, and to me it seems like it would potentially be very dense, and I feel like that's what I've heard people say about it. If I'm wrong, certainly let me know. But it's also a book in a series, and since I'm not super eager about it, like committing to potentially reading, I think it's 3 books and then a prequel that are all really, really thick, I don't know if I have it in me for this particular book. So this one I'm okay with not having read yet. But yeah, I do know it's really popular in the historical fiction world. And next we have Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, and Circe for that matter. And I don't have an excuse for this one, like none whatsoever. This is a book that has had so much hype, and a book that is loved by so many people who aren't even huge fans of historical fiction, and yet somehow I haven't read it. And so I know Song of Achilles is like a retelling of the Iliad, but I think it's from the perspective of Patroclus, and then Circe is a retelling from the feminist vantage point of Circe. And I think part of it might be that I haven't always been particularly drawn to antiquity in that sense. But then I read The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker last year and was just like, I've had a change of heart. I do like mythological retellings, and I like them a lot, especially when they hit you in the feels and make you cry, and basically that's what I've heard about Song of Achilles. So basically I'm just talking myself into putting this book on a TBR ASAP, because there really is no excuse. It sounds phenomenal, and I really do want to get around to it at some point, hopefully soon. But yeah, as of filming of this video, I have not read it. I know, I'm getting to it. I promise I will get to it. Next, we have The House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende, and I think this is actually her debut. So the one that skyrocketed her to like literary fame and bestseller status. It's a Latin American classic, a translation to boot, and I think Noelle actually read her most recent release and really enjoyed it, and so this kind of jogged my memory that like, oh yeah, I haven't read anything by Isabel Allende, which is a total shame on me moment. And this one I know is so beloved. I actually know someone who has read it like 3 or 4 times at this point. That's how much they love it. And so I feel like I have to get to it. And I do think that this is a book that I would love. Yes, it has magical realism elements in it, I believe, which isn't usually my cup of tea, but it is a like multi-generational family saga. I think it spans like nearly 100 years or something like that. From what I've heard, it's absolutely heartbreaking, and I love a story that's gonna make me ugly sob, so I need to get to this. I'm thinking that I might maybe save it for WIT month, so Women in Translation month, which I think is in July or August, so I might try to read it then. But this is definitely a historical fiction that I do want to read at some point, because it does sound absolutely fabulous, and not to mention it would help me with one of my reading goals, which is to read more women in translation this year. So killing 2 birds with 1 stone here. But yeah, ashamed to say I haven't read anything by Isabel Allende at this point in my life. I'm going to fix that though. And the next book is A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles, and I have no words for why I haven't picked this book up yet. Because if you are a subscriber to my channel, then you know basically any book that has a Russian angle to it ends up on my TBR. I am obsessed with the culture, the history, the books, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, and so the fact that I haven't read this one is a mystery to me, like a lot of the books on this list, but this one in particular is a big mystery and will need to be rectified soon. This is a book that I know I've seen in bookstores over and over again. Like, it has a very striking black and white cover, And I know I've seen it on like tables at Barnes and Nobles, and for whatever reason, I've just never picked it up. And this is a total like judge a book by its cover thing. I had a totally different idea of what the book was than what it actually is, and now that I know what the book actually is, I am really intrigued. So the main character seems to be this Russian aristocrat who the Bolshevik tribunal decides is like an unrepentant aristocrat, and they sentence him to house arrest in this hotel, and he's supposed to live out his days there. And so from his like attic room in this hotel in Moscow, he's watching this tenuous and tumultuous time in Russian history unfold. And this is a time in Russian history that I'm particularly drawn to, but for whatever reason, I thought it was set like in the like 50s or 60s during the Cold War, and I was like, no. But this is Russian revolutionary historical fiction, and I'm sold. So this one will get read very soon, I think, because I'm kind of hyped about it now. And if you've read it, let me know if you enjoyed it, but also no spoilers, okay? Next is another Russian historical fiction that came to my attention first because a subscriber actually mentioned it in the comments several weeks or months ago, and it was the first time I'd ever heard of it. But then when I was doing research for this video, it popped up on a few best historical fiction books of all time lists, and it also has really high ratings on Goodreads. I think it's nearly like a 4.5 star rating. And that book, with all of that build-up, is The Bronze Horseman by Paulina Simons, and I don't know a ton about this book. I believe it is World War II historical fiction, and it's set during the 1940s. I think the Germans are trying to invade Russia. I think it's mostly focused around Leningrad, and I think there is like this really epic romance or love story within the book. I'm not 100% positive, but it sounds amazing. But I also think that it is the first book in a series, possibly, so I should probably finish reading the Marina M. duology before I tackle this one, but it's definitely a book that I want to get to at some point because it has amazing reviews and it does sound like it would be right up my alley. And the next book is The Other Boleyn Girl by Philippa Gregory, the reigning queen of historical fiction according to many people. And I have read Philippa Gregory novels, but it's certainly been a minute, and when I did read them, I didn't necessarily read them in any particular order. So this is one that I managed to skip or bypass, and it's not one that I really have any intention of reading. I know that it is more Tudor history, and it is about my favorite of Henry VIII's wives, Anne Boleyn and her sister Mary, and sort of their rivalry when Mary is King Henry's favorite, and then his interest wanes and he starts being interested in Anne Boleyn, who he eventually marries and who is Queen Elizabeth's mother, and all of that. For me, I ended up, I wouldn't say outgrowing, but having my interest in Philippa Gregory novels wane to the point that I'm really not interested in reading her books anymore, even though I know she continues to publish. I think she has another series called Tidelands that's come out fairly recently, and I think part of it is because to me it did feel like she played a little bit fast and loose with historical fact to the point that I was not necessarily happy with it. And I know it's historical fiction, so it's not nonfiction. You're not supposed to read it as like gospel. And there's such things as artistic license, and a lot of what historical fiction writers are doing is making their best guess at what would have happened behind closed doors, because it's not like we know what every conversation was or why every decision is made. They're kind of trying to piece together history and make it entertaining, but Sometimes with Philippa Gregory, I just wasn't impressed or thrilled with the choices that she made for her novels. And so this is one that I've seen the movie, and the movie wasn't great in my opinion, although the costumes were fabulous, but I do feel like this was just one of those books that I'm okay having not read. And I just want to say that although Philippa Gregory is not an author who I run to, if she's one of your favorites or if you enjoy her books, like, that is great. It's just that my tastes have changed, and as I said, I did read her books when they first came out a number of years ago, and I did enjoy the ones that I read. It's just my tastes have changed, and so this is not a priority for me at this point. And the next one is The Nightingale by Kristin, which I do actually own. It's on my physical TBR. I have 2 Kristin books, and neither of them are books that I've read at this point. For whatever reason, these books always end up kind of being low priority for me. This one is World War II historical fiction, which is certainly up my alley and something that I am drawn to. I think it's about 2 sisters living in German-occupied France during the war, and I think one sister ends up joining the resistance. And so women at war, especially in World War I and World War II, is really interesting to me and should be enough to get my attention. But I also feel like there's so much World War II historical fiction out there that I'm really excited about, that this one I end up only kind of being lukewarm about. I would like to read it though at some point, but it still kind of ends up being a low priority for me. But yeah, it's a World War II historical fiction that I know a lot of people love. I think it won like one of the Goodreads awards at some point, like the year that it came out. So it is very, very popular. But yeah, eventually, maybe, we'll see. I'll get to it. And the next book is Beloved by Toni Morrison. This has won all the awards. I think it's a Pulitzer. It's Toni Morrison, so I know the writing is going to be lyrical and just gorgeous. I also know that it's undoubtedly going to be gut-wrenching, but I have not read it yet, and I think part of that reason is because I already know what happens and it's been spoiled for me, because a number of my friends wrote their thesis on this book or wrote like term papers on Beloved for a Gothic literature class that I was in, and so I know exactly what happens. I've read all sorts of like analysis on the book itself, even though I haven't read the book itself. And yeah, for me, part of the fun in reading a book is not necessarily knowing how it's going to end, so the fact that I know basically the whole story has kind of given me pause, but I do feel like it's such an important piece of literary fiction that at some point I should actually read it, because I did read The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison this year and thought that was beautiful but also gut-wrenching. But yeah, this is just a book that I'm sad it's been spoiled for me, but I do feel like it's in the literary canon for a reason, so I should read it at some point. And the final book is The Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry, and I feel like this is like a Bookstagram and BookTube darling because it has a stunning cover, but I also know that a lot of people think very highly of this book and consider it one of their favorite historical fiction novels, and I honestly don't know why I haven't read it yet, because I do own a copy. In fact, at one point I owned 2 copies, a hardcover and a paperback, and I really do need to get to it because it sounds really, really interesting. There's something very gothic about it. From what I know, it's set in Victorian England in Essex, where there's this rumor that this legendary creature, the Essex Serpent, has returned, whatever that means, and I'm just intrigued for a number of reasons. One of them Sarah Waters has hailed it a work of great intelligence and charm, and if you are a subscriber of mine, you will know that Sarah Waters is one of my favorite authors of all time, and basically whenever she says a book is good, I believe it and buy it and read it. So the fact that she has said really great things about this one makes it a priority. Also, it's said that it's influenced by Mary Shelley, Bram Stoker, Wilkie Collins, Charles Dickens, so it definitely has those Gothic and Victorian vibes that I am personally really drawn to. I love a good Gothic novel, so there are a lot of things about this book that check off a lot of boxes for me, so I do need to get to it, and it's definitely on my TBR. The question is when I will get to it. It's hard to tell. That list of books never ends. But yeah, this is a book that I definitely have my eye on and want to get to. Just unfortunately, I have not read it yet. So, womp womp. So yeah, those are 10 of the popular historical fiction books that I haven't read yet, but as you can see, there are quite a few on this list that I do want to get around to at some point. If you've read any of them, certainly let me know which ones to prioritize so that I can get to them sooner rather than later. But I do hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please be sure to give it a thumbs up, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye!